you so much for coming back to my channel. If you are new here, I'm so thankful you clicked on. If you feel like it, give this video a like if you enjoy it, and if not, that's okay. You can give it a dislike if you do not. That's just, you know, it is what it is. I just want to say thank you so much for the support and the kindness that you've shown me since I've started my channel. I have received so much wonderful feedback and just all around positivity from the Gannon Stauch Part 1 video. You are helping, you know, bring awareness to this case, and we're gonna hopefully see this young man get justice soon and swiftly. Part 2 will be up on Saturday. Today is our very first Plot Twist Tuesday. Yay. I hope you enjoy it. It is a wild, wild, wild ride. So buckle in. But first, we're gonna have just a couple of quick announcements and then we'll get started. Don't forget about our 1,000 subscriber giveaway. All you have to do is be subscribed to this YouTube channel. Go ahead and click the 3 dots in the upper right corner and select 1080p if you have it. If not, 720p. It will make your video quality so much better, and it'll even make the sound quality better. Ignore the smudge. I messed my makeup up while I was trying to change shirts, so my bad. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, my usual disclaimer, I don't mean any harm to any families that or friends of the victim or people involved in this case. I would never mean any harm. All I'm trying to do is bring awareness to this case, bring awareness to this victim's life and story. I hope you do enjoy this video, but keep in mind that this is a person that lost their life, and we need to make sure that we are respectful to them and their legacy. Although the person who passed did things that they shouldn't, we all do. That's just who we are as humans. So just make sure to be incredibly respectful to the victim. So let's go ahead and jump on in. What is a catfish? I know most people know this, especially because of the TV show and the documentary that came out entitled Catfish, but I just want to give you a definition. So the definition of catfish is to lure someone into a relationship or a friendship by means of a fake persona. So if I went on to social media and posted pictures of someone else and a different name, and I was the one controlling that profile and sending messages and requests and things out to other people and soliciting a relationship, no matter if it's a intimate relationship, a friendship, whatever, that is considered me catfishing someone else. I just realized my ring light was in the bottom corner, sorry. So like I was saying earlier, catfishing is something that has kind of come into our everyday language, or at least it's a household definition now because of a popular documentary which then turned into a television show. Was written and directed by Neve Schulman and his brother. And then of course MTV picked up the television show, and Neve along with Max, they go around the United States and they find people who are catfishing or have been catfished. One thing that is important to say though is this happened before catfishing was a term. Yes, people have always pretended to be somebody they weren't, but it wasn't as widely popular to do so as it is now. Just keep that in mind, because some things you would be like, if it happened today, you would be like, I would absolutely know that person wasn't real if that happened. But because of the time it was in the early to mid 2000s, it was less popular to do this, and less people knew that people would do this. We're going to talk about the story of Thomas Montgomery. Thomas Montgomery was a 46-year-old male who lived upstate New York in a house with his wife Cindy, who had been married to him for 17 years, and their 2 daughters. Thomas, who I will probably refer to as Tom in this video, worked at Dynabrade, and it was a power tool factory. There he worked as a machinist, and he made things such as buffers, car parts, and power tools. Thomas wanted to change his career. He was unsatisfied and unhappy with his life, but he had 2 daughters and a wife to support, and he felt like if he tried to change his careers, he would have to take a huge pay cut. So, reluctantly, he stayed at Dynabrade. Thomas loved reminiscing about his youth and about when he was a Marine. Growing up, he always wanted to be a Marine, and he loved watching war movies, especially ones that starred John Wayne. He grew up to become a Marine when he was older, but he never saw live combat. He said he always wanted to be a combat Marine, but he never was. He tells us that he always wanted to go to war. He wanted to test his skills against someone else's. He figured people would think he was crazy by saying that, but that's just something he always wanted. Like I said, he never saw a day of live combat in his military career, but he was very familiar with sniper rifles and being a Marine sniper. Although he never was one, he was just kind of almost obsessed with that lifestyle. Thomas left the military and left with a pretty severe drinking problem. Although he quit cold turkey once he had his 2 daughters and was married and became kind of like a family man. He was incredibly responsible, and he was what you would consider a model citizen. He taught Sunday school at Drive United Presbyterian. He often would gather the kids in his neighborhood around to play baseball and games and things like that to keep them entertained, and also he never even had a speeding ticket in his life. He was a great father. He was heavily involved in his children's lives. He was the vice president of his daughter's swim team. He never missed a meet. He was always there for his girls, and people just really thought he was all around a wonderful guy. His neighbors even said he was one of the nicest people they knew and the best neighbor. He was described as not hated by his coworkers, but they definitely thought that he was pretty awkward. And he was. Thomas was very isolated, and he kept to himself. He was going through a lot mentally, and he was fighting off depression. Everyone thought he was a great husband to his wife of 17 years, Cindy, but things aren't always as they appear. His marriage was in trouble. In fact, his marriage was absolutely falling apart. He said that he put so much pressure on himself to try and fix the marriage that he lost himself, and he just couldn't do it anymore. He really wanted to and tried to make it work. He tells us in an interview that intimacy is only one part of a relationship, that communication is a huge part, and they just did not have that. In fact, he went to some of the ministers at his church and explained the marital issues that he was having, and they just told him he needed to work on communication, and he tried, but it just wasn't there. He said that he would only see his side of the story, and that he wasn't disappointed in Cindy. He was more disappointed in himself and how his life was going. He had a great wife and great kids and a perfect life, seemingly, but he was just so unhappy and so unsatisfied. And that made him feel so guilty because he felt like he should be happy with what he had, but he just wasn't. He just wanted more out of life. He always loved playing card games, and he and his coworkers joined Pogo.com, which is a gaming site, or at least it was at this time. I'm not sure if it still is. So he would go online and he would play games on there, such as Texas Hold'em and poker. Not only was it an online game room, but it was also an online chat room. So there he said he would talk to everybody. He felt like because he would never meet them in person, or they didn't realize exactly who he was, he could talk to them and tell them about his marital issues and just tell them everything he was going through, and they wouldn't judge because they didn't even know him. Like I stated earlier, his coworkers were playing on there with him, but he would talk to more the strangers on the internet and the ones in that chat room that would talk back to him that didn't know him in real life. His online persona and his gaming tag, or his username as we would call it now, was Marine Sniper. Things were going great for Tom. He was relieving some stress by playing online games. It was kind of putting him in a world of the internet instead of reality for a little while. Everything was going great. He was playing blackjack one day online, and he got a message. Someone by the name of Tall Hot Blonde, all in one word, reached out to him, and she said, "Hi, how are you?" And he said back, "Hey Tall, how are you?" And from there, things became out of control. Tall Hot Blonde was a young girl, and her name was Jessie. Not only was she young, but she was a teenager. She was 17 years old. Jessie was a beautiful young girl from Oak Hill, West Virginia, which is kind of like the town I live in from what research I've done. It's incredibly small and it's pretty rural. There's not much in that town. It's in the middle of woods and a very hilly, is that a word? I don't know. There were a lot of hills. Jessie was from a fairly lower middle class family. She lived with her brother, her mother, who was a stay-at-home mom, and her father. They lived in a fairly small home next to an auto parts store. Jessie was absolutely beautiful. She was tall, hot, and blonde, as cliche as that sounds. She was a pageant queen. She loved sports, especially softball. She was a star athlete playing softball at her school. She was about to go to prom, graduate, and maybe even go to college. Jessie ended up telling Tom that he was in the wrong room, that this was a kids and teens chat room. Tom said that he panicked and he thought about all of those sting shows that, like To Catch a Predator, that, set older people up to fall into a trap of messaging an underage person, and so he panicked and he did the only thing that he knew to do. He thought what he was about to do was logical, which you and I, hopefully, would not think it was logical. He told Jessie that he was 18, and of course Jessie was like, oh, okay, so their conversation continued. Tom gave Jessie his email address, and from there she immediately, on the first day that they met, sent several pictures of herself in provocative means. It was by no means pornographic, but it was provocative. It was photos of her in swimsuits and in pretty provocative poses. How many times am I going to say the word provocative? She asked him to describe himself physically, and he told her that he was 6 foot, which he was, but he also told her that he was muscular and had big shoulders, and she said she liked that in a man. In these moments, these early moments within their relationship, if you will, he becomes absolutely infatuated, to a point that it is an obsession for him. He becomes addicted to Jessie. He knew that she would stop messaging him if she found out that he was a middle-aged man with a wife and 2 daughters. So he made up and played into this fantasy character that he told her about. Jessie didn't know Thomas, or Tom. Jessie knew Tommy, an 18-year-old, fresh out of high school, Marine, or soon-to-be Marine. He was shipping off to Paris Island to go through boot camp. He was going to become a Marine sniper. He said he knew he would never meet her in person, so he could pretty much tell her whatever he wanted to, and she had no reason not to believe it. Keep in mind, again, all of this was before Catfish, so she may have not even had any doubts that he was who he said he was. He told her outlandish sob stories about how Tommy never felt loved, that he grew up without his mother because she died when he was young, which was true. She died when he was 12, and that he never felt loved since then. He also told her he was a loner that didn't have feelings because he had been hurt so many times in the past. We don't know how much of this was true. The only backstory and information I could find on Thomas Montgomery, the actual Thomas Montgomery, was that when he was younger, like a teenager, a student at his high school, a cheerleading student at his high school, told everyone that he had assaulted her sexually, and nothing ever came of that. We don't know if it's true or not, but that's one of the reasons he went into the military. That and the fact that he had always loved watching military movies and things growing up. He always knew he wanted to be in the military, but to get away from his high school and his town where this horrible alleged thing happened, and this rumor, if it wasn't true, was following him, he decided he wanted to go off to boot camp and become a Marine. However, the majority of his persona was a lie. His age, what he looked like, which we'll get more into that in a minute, and just most of the stories about what he was doing during the day, things he liked, things he enjoyed, most of it was a huge lie. But like I said, he was so infatuated with her. He said that Jessie opened up something inside of him that he didn't even know was possible. They talked about all kinds of things. Jessie asked him why he wanted to become a Marine, and he said he wanted to push himself to be the best and to be the toughest. Jessie, of course, eventually wanted to see what Tommy looked like, this dream man that she had been talking to and started developing feelings towards. So Thomas took a 30-year-old military photo of himself in the military when he was younger and sent that to her. So it was him, but it was just him 30 years ago. When Jessie would want to talk on the phone to Tommy, he would have to lie and say they would have to do it later when he was off duty. So he would wait to talk to her super late at night, sometimes even in the middle of the night when his family was sleeping. Jessie genuinely believed that Tommy was who he said he was. She genuinely believed that Tommy was an 18-year-old Marine who she just absolutely fell head over heels for, who just serendipitously fell into her lap through this online chat room. She called him her sweet, sexy Marine, which pains me to say that out loud. Tom could not believe his luck. This beautiful 17-year-old, tall, hot blonde was in love with him and wanted to continuously talk to him all the time. Rex Bieber, who is probably one of my favorite people on this planet now, he was heavily involved in the documentary, which I'm going to talk about at the end, but he was heavily involved in a documentary made about this story, and he's a clinical psychologist. He has dragons, like dragon statues next to his fire mantle in his home. Like, they're huge dragon statues. I'll try to put a picture in. He's so cool. Anyways, he said that Tom was in a dead-end marriage, in a dead-end life, and he was just looking for anything to excite him. Although his life would be good enough for many, in fact, it would be better than a lot of people had, he just was not satisfied. It wasn't good enough for him, and it especially wasn't good enough for Tommy, this character that he had created. He was stimulus hungry, and a normal, decent, healthy life was just not good enough for him. Rex Bieber also says that Tom had an opportunity for something more, something that he thought was better, something different. When asked what was satisfying about being in a relationship with someone that you've never met, Rex Bieber responded with, "What's satisfying about a relationship isn't the reality of it, it's about the fantasy of what it could be." Jessie also had fantasies of her own. She wanted the most out of life. She would tell Tommy that he was going to be her one-way ticket out of her small town. She would send him videos that she made herself, like of slideshows of pictures of herself set to like power ballads or love songs. She started sending him other things as well, and it started to get risky for Tom because she was sending them in the mail. She sent him a necklace that said Jessie and Tommy forever, and it broke. It was a heart and it broke down the middle, and she sent him the Jessie one and she wore the Tommy one. Just imagine like the best friend necklaces that you'd get from Claire's when you were in like the 6th grade. That's what this was. Jessie also sent Tommy something else. She sent him her lingerie, her undergarments. With that, she would send letters and talk intimately to him, and together they would talk about things. You know what I mean. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail because, number one, it's really hard to find the instant messages between the two of them online. I have done research for this case for a while, and it's hard to find that information. But from different interviews and different transcripts that I have been able to find, the majority, well, I won't say the majority, but a humongous part of their messaging, at least what was made to the public, was heavily sexual. And keep in mind, Thomas was 46, about to turn 47, and Jessie was 17. They would also talk about the life they were going to have together. She would tell him how excited she was going to be to meet him, how she'd run up to him and jump into his arms and throw her arms and legs around him, and he would spin her around, very fantasy for her. He was her Prince Charming. She would ask him when he thought they would be able to meet, and he would panic, and he would tell her elaborate stories about how he was being deployed into enemy territory in Iraq, and this was around the time a war was going on, or at least deployment was going on. He would tell her that he was going to protect her and America. Keep in mind, he had always wanted to be involved in live combat when he was in the military, so he's getting to live out this life that he had always wanted, even if it was virtual. He was pretending to be someone he wasn't, as we all know. He was pretending to be this 18-year-old handsome young Marine fighting for his country and for the love of his life. And he would tell us in an interview that Jessie was helping him live out his dream life, even if it was online. He could live out his fantasy. He could do anything he wanted, be anything he wanted, and he would just live that way. Tommy took things a step further. He would pretend to be Tommy's father, talking to Jessie while Tommy was out on dangerous recon missions and in live combat, on the battlefield. Jesse spoke solely to Tommy's father the majority of the first 6 months or so of this online relationship. Now, Thomas said he did this for another reason. He said he knew that he needed to end things with Jesse. He was just being eaten up by guilt. He told her, posing as his own father, that he was no longer going to be relaying messages back and forth for Tommy and Jesse, that he was going to stop responding. However, she was his addiction, and he could not stop. More lies piled up on top of the lies that he had already told her. He was completely infatuated, obsessed, consumed. He tells us that it felt like he was drinking again, except Jesse was his drink. Jesse was his alcohol. He would talk to her until 5 o'clock in the morning, even though he had to be at work at 7 in the morning. Thomas had an addictive personality. You know, if it wasn't alcohol, it was the internet, or cards, or Jesse, or excitement. It was always something. He followed all of that around everywhere he could. He was just constantly intrigued by it. It would start to cause turmoil in Cindy and Thomas's marriage. He would snap at his wife for no reason. She would get up in the middle of the night and he would still be online playing games. She would try to talk to him and he would just ignore her or, like I said, snap at her for no reason at all. But Jesse, on the other hand, was absolutely smitten. 6 months into her relationship with Tommy, she made a diary entry. I'm going to read it so it's correct, but it says, "My heart was breaking. He told me the only reason he enlisted was to die. I told him to stay alive for me. He asked me to marry him and I said yes. I'll be so nervous about my first time, but soon I'll be Mrs. Jessica Montgomery." So, obviously, Tommy had asked Jesse to marry him once he got home from Iraq, which to you and I seems bizarre. Why would he do this if he knew that he was never going to meet her? He said he knew he wasn't going to do it. Obviously, he couldn't. He wasn't Tommy. But he did it anyway because it made him feel good. It made him feel like he was young again, like he did when he and Cindy were happy. He said he didn't think this would hurt Jessie. She was young and beautiful. She would find somebody else to make her happy when she grew up. But how could you do this to a young, gullible teenager? She really thought she was engaged to a man and he wasn't even real. As time went on, Tom started believing that Tommy was real in an incredibly unhealthy way. Tom started crossing the line between fantasy and reality. He would take things way too far. On January 2nd, 2006, Tom wrote a note, and it was written on a Dynabraid notepad, and he kept it in his work locker. On January 2nd, 2006, Tom Montgomery ceases to exist and is replaced by an 18-year-old battle-scarred Marine. All paperwork is set, i.e. birth certificate, social security card. He is a strong, good-looking, battle-hardened boy. He has money in the bank, $2.5 million, and has a 9-inch private part. He is moving to West Virginia to be with the love of his life. He then goes on to make bullet points. 1. An 18-year-old Marine with bullet scars on his shoulder and right leg. 2. He's handsome, like a red-headed Harrison Ford. 3. Money in the bank. 4. The best lover. 5. No longer impotent. That is so alarming. He was so obsessed with this online life that he was living that he started to truly believe that at 46 years old, he would physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually turn into an 18-year-old boy. He started preparing for it. He had such a need for this to be real that it almost made him have a moment or moments of insanity. Psychologists in interviews that I have seen about Thomas Montgomery have stated that they felt like he was in a state of psychosis or having a psychotic break. He no longer lived in his real life. The internet was his world. It was his whole life, and that was truly scary. He was living in a fantasy world, and everything was going perfect to him. He had the girl of his dreams. He was living out the career he wanted to live out. He was a perfect, handsome, young, built man, and everything was perfect until one day his wife Cindy started to become suspicious. She would be sitting on the couch and he would be sitting at the desktop computer in the same living room. She would try to talk to him and he would ignore her, just completely ignore her. He would say, you know, I'm playing games, and she would come over to see what games he was playing, and he would shut his laptop, or he would click a button that would make the chat with Jesse, which is what he was really doing, go away. She would come over and ask what games he was playing, who he was talking to, and he would just say, oh, you know, just talking to some friends. So he started to feel guilty again. He says he knew he needed to end things with Jesse, and he really wanted to. The guilt got so bad that the summer of 2006, he had what he thought at the time was a heart attack, and he was rushed to the hospital to find out that it was an anxiety attack so bad, caused from stress and guilt. He tried to do more things that would relax him and keep him stress-free, so he stayed off of the internet for a while. He said it just made things worse because Jesse was out there wondering, was Tommy okay? Was Tommy alive? However, karma, fate, serendipity, happenstance, coincidence, whatever you believe, it happened one day. Cindy came home from work and she saw a box. In the box, it contained letters from Jesse talking to Tommy about their life, and it contained other things. It contained a red pair of women's underwear. The letters and the suspicious activity that Thomas was having made her realize what was going on. So she approached Tom, and she was like, how could you ever do this to me? How could you not only have an affair with me, but make an 18-year-old, or at the time she had turned 18, how could you make this 18-year-old think that, you know, you are 18 and you are this whole other person? She was incredibly angry and devastated, as you can imagine. She told her that he had a wife, 2 daughters, a dog, a happy home, a good life. Why was he doing this? He should be working out his issues with Cindy instead of causing a relationship and emotional issues in an 18-year-old. At one point she said, I'm right here. And he told her, it's just easier to talk to people online because I can't see them and their emotion. Like right now, you're angry. Obviously she was angry. She had every right to be angry. She was devastated, hurt, mad, and she wanted a divorce. But before she did, she wrote a letter, and that letter was addressed to Jesse. The letter said, Jesse, enclosed you will find a picture of my family. Let me introduce you to these people. The man in the center is Tom, my husband. There is no Tommy. He is taking advantage of you. You need to be much more cautious with your safety. You will only be hurt by a man who has mastered the art of manipulation and lies. Do not trust words in a computer. Signed, Cindy Montgomery. What a queen. Cindy is probably my favorite person involved in this entire case. She was so strong, and when she was angry, she didn't lash out at Jesse. She gave her almost like motherly advice, like be careful who you talk to. Her letter was so well put together and so incredibly thoughtful. So, how did Jesse react when she received that letter? She was absolutely shocked, devastated, hurt to her core. Everything that she had known, this man that she was in love with, wasn't even a real person. She was engaged to a fake person. Can you even imagine getting a letter like that? The man she was planning her future with, her wedding, her family with, was not even real. He was just a huge lie. She will later on tell Brian, who we will talk about in just a moment, that she was disgusted that she was sexting a 46-year-old, middle-aged, balding father. She asked Thomas why did he do this to her? Why did he lie to her? He says he wishes he could explain it. He truly didn't mean to do this. He didn't mean to lie to her, but the damage was already done. It was too late for an apology. Tom said he was actually pretty relieved that this happened. It was a huge weight lifted off of him. Rex Baber, the clinical psychologist with the cool dragon statues that I was talking about, he comes on this interview and he says that he feels as though Thomas was relieved, but Tommy was not. And I know that sounds bizarre. However, Tommy was someone inside of Thomas who deeply wanted to come out but was struggling. Thomas wouldn't be able to get rid of that. He would only be able to hold Tommy inside of him for so long before he just came out. He would never be able to get rid of Marine Sniper. Let's talk about the third part of this love triangle. Sorry if the camera angle is a little different. I got up to grab some water and accidentally hit the tripod, so my bad. So the third part of this love triangle is Brian Barrett. Brian M. Barrett was born on February 1st, 1984. He worked at Dynabraid with Thomas Montgomery. He was working and going to school part-time to become a teacher. After he graduated high school, he enrolled in Erie Community College and started working part-time at Dynabraid. His father was the one who found the newspaper clipping and told him to apply for the job. Once he got his associate's degree, he transferred to Buffalo College. He was described as a happy-go-lucky kid. He was always someone who would help out if you needed it. He cared for everyone, and he always had a smile on his face. He loved sports, especially baseball. He was a star athlete in high school where he played baseball. He was a huge Sabres and Bills fan. He had a truck that he worked so hard for and paid off with cash, and he was very proud of that truck. He was considered your all-American young man. He was 22, he had his whole life ahead of him. Brian played online games with Jesse and Thomas and other people from Jesse and Tom's work. Brian's screen name was Beefcake, and Jesse remembered that. She knew that Beefcake and Marine Sniper worked together, so she reached out to Brian to ask him what's happening. Like, is what Tom's wife said to her, is that real? Is he really a 46, 47-year-old middle-aged man? Jesse told him everything, and Brian could not believe it. He was shocked, but mostly he was there for Jesse. He consoled her through her horrific breakup with Tommy, and she was leaning on Brian, and soon they developed a friendship and then, of course, a relationship. She soon started sending him the same photos that she had sent Tommy, who she thought she was sending them to, and she started sending them to Brian. Jesse was just perfectly Brian's type. His parents said that he loved blondes and he really liked athletic girls, and Jesse was both of those things. Plus, she was beautiful and she was 18, so she was closer in age with Brian than, she really was with Tom. Their friendly and then romantic relationship also became intimate. They became very close, and Jesse started doing the same things, sending Brian packages and letters. She just really quickly fell for him, and he quickly fell for her as well. One letter with pictures attached read, "My sweet Brian, I love you, Brian. You are very special to me. I hope you enjoy the pictures, baby. I couldn't decide which ones to send you, so I sent you several. I really enjoy all the time you're getting to spend together. It really means a lot to me. I love you, Brian. I need you, Brian. I want you, Brian. I want you and need you, Brian, to hold and kiss you. Can't wait to spend more time with you, getting to know you better. Kisses, baby. I love you." Ew. What Brian didn't know is that Jesse was still absolutely and just totally consumed by rage and just furious at Tom for lying to her and letting her fall in love with her dream guy who wasn't even real. So sweet, up until this point, innocent Jesse started taking things to a dark place. She used Brian as leverage over Tom and would flaunt their relationship to him. It was like she was using Brian to make Tom jealous. Brian also didn't know that Jesse and Tom were still talking, even after Jesse knew that Tom was, Tom. Jesse would message Tom and say things like, "I really like Brian because he doesn't lie to me and because he's closer in my age. I really love him." She also told Tom that she and Brian both had video and web cameras, and because of this they would send one another pictures and videos of their private parts. She also drove a wedge in between Thomas and Brian because she told Thomas that Brian was aware that Jesse was using him to make Thomas jealous, and he was okay with that. However, Brian was clueless. He had real feelings for Jesse. Thomas was doing really well, for a few weeks. He really felt like he was over Jesse and they had no contact. That was until she reached out to him to tell him about her and Brian, and things started all over for Thomas again. However, Jesse was ready to end things with Thomas, and he agreed. He knew that they needed to go their separate ways. This is one of the cheesiest message threads, if you will, that I've ever read. So just prepare yourself.
I'm sorry for all the pain I caused you with my lies. Will you do me a favor? What is that? Don't let Tommy die. He won't, as long as he is in your heart. Let him live in you. You're crying, aren't you? I haven't stopped. I love you, Jessica. And I always will. Okay, I'm ready. Goodbye, Tom. Goodbye, Jessica.
It was a lot. All of that boiled down to the fact that they decided to go their separate ways. So that's the ending, right? Wrong. Things could not be that easy on Plot Twist Tuesdays. This could have been the perfect ending, but something was still happening. Jesse was still full of rage, even after their cheesy exchange, deciding that they didn't need to be in each other's lives and that they were leaving amicably. Jesse used Brian to get revenge, and he went along with it. At first, they would go into the chat rooms that they would all talk in the games, and they would call him a predator, and they reported him, and he was banned from that site. And keep in mind, to Thomas, the computer, although not talking to Jesse anymore, is an addiction. These card games, this gaming, is still very, very important to him. They would call him a predator and a loser, and just berate him. That wasn't enough for Jesse and Brian. Brian started eventually telling the coworkers of both Tom and Brian at Dynabraid about what happened. That Tom pretended online to be this young, strapping gentleman here to sweep Jesse off of her feet, but he wasn't that. One chat says the following. Brian says, "What should I say?" Jesse responds with, "It's up to you, baby." Brian says, "I have to," another word for mess with him. And Jesse says, "You're bad." And Brian says, "I'm still laughing." So again, like I said earlier, there's a victim in this story. This is a true crime story, so there has to be some crime in it. And although we don't want to victim shame, everyone in this story, except my queen, Cindy, had something bad to do with this case. There was lying, making fun of others, spreading rumors about others, or murdering someone. Obviously, they're all at varying degrees of wrong. I don't want to victim shame, but none of this should have happened. No one should have berated others. No one should have told coworkers, whatever. When their coworkers found out what happened, Thomas was upset. His fantasy and reality worlds collided in the worst way possible, and he was mortified. He was so embarrassed, robbed of his privacy, and now no longer to balance out this reality and fantasy that he lived in. His fantasy world now really no longer existed. Thomas stopped talking to Brian, and he told Jesse and Brian to leave him alone. Brian then started getting annoyed with Jesse because she was so pushy for him to do things to Tom. Brian started to no longer want to listen to her or even really talk to her, but then Jesse invited him to come visit her in West Virginia. He told some coworkers, and word got around to Tom, and Tom was livid, to say the very least. He texted Brian and he said, "So you're going to see her?" And Brian responded with, "I don't know. I'm really tired of her BS. I don't know what I'm going to do with her." Now, Tom took this as a threat to Jesse, saying that Brian was coming there for one reason and one reason only. And then he texts Brian over and over again, and he says, "I can't believe you choose her over our friendship." He then texts Brian some explicit messages about taking Jesse's virginity. He will say things like, explicit, good luck, things like that. Brian asked him, "Why does it matter to you so much? You are so much older than her." And that's when things take a turn. I'm not going to repeat what Thomas says to Brian in this text message. He calls her a lot of explicit names. He's directing his rage at both Jesse and Brian. He also uses a very racist term, not calling them this, but insinuating something else, and I'm just not even going to repeat any of that. I'm not even going to censor it. It's just too much. He then tells Brian, "You wanted her and now you've got her. Leave me the explicit alone." All of that was in vain to Brian, because Jesse texted Brian and telling him not to come because all he wanted was sex. So she broke up with Brian, and that's where it ends, right? No. She went back to Tom. Imagine that. Even though she knew his age and that he had lied to her, and he knew that she made an absolute fool of him in these chat rooms and at work, they were able to mend their relationship. Now, I want to just make a point, because I don't think I've said it thus far, but they're not only communicating on these chat rooms anymore. They've swapped, phone numbers, and they've swapped MySpaces, and they have swapped emails, and are using, IM and other things to communicate. It's not just these chat rooms. Jesse asked Tom to start over as friends. She tells him they meant way too much to each other to feel the way they do towards each other now. And just like that, he was back in Fantasyland. Even though Jesse knew everything, and Tom knew all that Jesse and Brian had put him through, he still cared about her. He tells her he wants to be friends and have fun like they used to. She agrees, and he messages her and says, "Hi, I'm Tom. I'm 47 and I'm a former Marine." And Jesse messages him and says, "Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm 18 and I just graduated." Now that they're friends again, Tom starts confiding in Jesse. He tells Jesse that Brian lost a really good friend in him, and he made a very deadly enemy. He tells Jesse that she has turned his heart ice cold, and he hates Brian so much that he would kill him for 10 cents. Jesse was, of course, taken back, and she told him that he was being a little drastic and dramatic. He told her that payback was an explicit, and that he was the ultimate weapon. He was a Marine. Jesse asks him what he's going to do, and Tom tells her that, quote, her little boyfriend came very close to dying. She asks him if he's being serious, and he tells her, yes, very serious. She asks when, and he tells her the day after you two explicits were messing with me. She replies with, "Oh." And he says if I had pulled a little harder, he would be gone. He says that Brian will pay in blood. You would think Jesse would, tell the police, or at least tell someone, but she doesn't. She doesn't even really seem to be too concerned. In fact, she almost gets kind of a thrill out of it. She tells Thomas that she will never ever betray him, and she will never speak to Brian ever again. She takes things to a pretty dark place. She tells him she aches for Tommy. He tells her that she killed Tommy inside of him, and that he would sell his soul to be that version of himself for her. Things begin to get intimate between the two of them again. Now, imagine this. She starts flirting with other guys in their I almost said Snapchat. She starts flirting with other guys in their chat room. Thomas was very upset, and he begged her to stop dragging him along. Thomas threatens Jesse. He tells her that if she doesn't stop dragging him along, that he's going to come to West Virginia and hurt her, or take something away from her that she loves. meaning her mom. She stopped talking to him for a few days, but then she comes back and said that her mom wants to talk to him. So he, of course, agreed, and Jesse's mom tells him to leave her daughter alone and stop talking to her, to which he says, "I will, as long as you will reciprocate that favor and ask her to please leave me alone and stop talking to me as well." Several weeks go by and Jesse and Tom aren't communicating at all, but in true Jesse fashion, she comes back and messages him. He reminds her that they're not supposed to be talking, that it was against her mother's wishes. She tells him that her mom will never know. He tells her he can't afford for her to keep coming in and out of his life. He wasn't a yo-yo for her to play with. She tells him, "Look, I'm completely defying my mother's wishes to talk to you." And he tells her that she loves attention. And she responds with, "Yes, so give me some more." For a few weeks, they messaged back and forth, and it consisted of verbal abuse and sexual tension on both parts. Jessie defied Tom's wishes of her never messaging Brian again because she did that. She messaged Brian. So they started talking again. And I don't know if you had a MySpace page, but you know how you could select your top 8 or 12 or whatever. She did that, and Brian was on her top 8, we'll say. Tom had no idea that Jessie and Brian were talking again until he saw her MySpace and saw that Brian was present in her top 8. That is when all hell broke loose. Thomas and Jessie get into a huge fight. He tells Jessie he can handle her with anyone, but he cannot handle her with Brian. Jessie told him that she was not with Brian, but she also no longer wanted to be with Tommy. She said that she wanted to remain friends and not become enemies, but Thomas was consumed by his rage. He messaged Jessie and told her that she should be afraid because she told Jessie what he would do if she and Brian got back together.
This is editing Lexie from the future. I realized I messed that sentence up. What I meant to say was Tom told Jessie to be afraid of him because he had told her what would happen if she and Brian ended up together.
He also told Jessie that she was going to pay for her actions. Jessie messages Brian and tells him that Tom is irate because he thought that Jessie and Brian were together again. Brian tells Jessie that he couldn't care less what Tom thought of him because he hadn't even talked to him in months. Jessie finally tells Brian that Tom had been threatening him. Brian very casually and nonchalantly drops a bomb. Brian tells Jessie that Tom had tried to hit him with his car several times while in the Dynabraid parking lot, and that once they go inside, Tom doesn't acknowledge it, doesn't look at him, doesn't say anything, doesn't even act like it happened. Jessie's response, it gets me every time. She messages back and says, "OMG, make sure he stays away from your truck." I'm like, he just was almost hit by a car, but whatever. Brian asks her if she thinks he should tell someone at work, like his boss or his coworkers. Jessie tells him that she's afraid of Tom, and Brian agrees and says that Tom is crazy. Reports will later show that Brian never told anyone. Meanwhile, Tom is absolutely blowing up Jessie's messages with such horrific insults and name-calling and just horrible things that I can't even give you a synopsis of what he's saying to her. Jessie is still messaging him back during all of this. She tells him she's sorry for hurting him, and if he loves her, he'll let her go. She tells him that she's really done this time, and she's not going to message back. And he's like, probably thinking the same thing we all are, like, okay, sure, yeah, She sends back, "Bye, baby." You can't make this stuff up. Every time Tom messages Jessie, she signs off of the website. Like, if you had a MySpace, you probably remember it would be like, "So-and-so is not online," or whatever. So, that Friday, September 17th, 2006, Brian leaves work at 10 p.m. He was one of the last people to leave Dynabraid working the late shift. He gets into his truck, which is parked near the back, and someone approaches his vehicle. They approach it from behind, walk up to the driver's side of the window, and as they're walking, they shoot him once. Then they get closer to the window and in point blank range shoot him twice more. Due to Brian's family being out of town, it would take 2 days for someone to find him. A Dynabraid employee was taking his, young teenage child to do driving lessons in the Dynabraid parking lot when he sees a truck that has the glass blown out of the window. They don't approach the window, but they do call the police, and they come. Once law enforcement officials get there, they have to go right up to the window because it's so tinted that it's hard to see inside. But once they do, they found Brian Barrett slumped over, dead from 3 gunshot wounds. The truck had 3 holes in the front driver's side window, and the rear passenger tire had been shot out. The person who did this was attempting to make Brian an easy target. As much as I hate to say this, the prosecution says that the person tried to make Brian a sitting duck. Investigators talked to someone who heard gunshots on Friday, and it would fit the timeline that they would eventually have. Brian left work around 10:15 to go to his car. He was supposed to meet some friends just for a casual hanging out. He gets in his car and is immediately shot. And these 3 gunshots line up with what the person who heard the gunshots, that witness, said it was around 10:15. The first was fired at a distance, and then the next 2 were up close. Brian was found slumped over to his right side, his arms by his side, and you could see a gunshot wound on his arm and on his neck. Detectives described this as a cold-blooded, planned out, and methodical murder, more of an execution. And to the detectives, at first they had no idea who had done this, but to you and I, knowing the story that we've learned thus far, it's not going to come as a surprise to you that it was Thomas Montgomery who shot Brian Barrett to death on that Friday night, September the 17th, 2006. Although at times Brian acted unwisely, he did not deserve to lose his life. We all, as humans, and especially at that age, I say that age, I'm 24, so I'm still pretty close to that age, we all make mistakes and we grow from them. But because of Thomas Montgomery's actions, Brian never got to learn from his mistakes and grow from them. He never got to be the teacher that he wanted to. His smile that lit up the room was no longer on this earth. His family was just utterly devastated. Investigators were ready to find out who did this immediately, so they immediately started their investigation. After talking to some coworkers and finding out that Brian and Tom had been friends and then something happened within their friendship that caused a divide, they pretty quickly zeroed in on Thomas Montgomery. Then a coworker told them, and without knowing what kind of gun it was or what kind of bullets were used, a coworker came forward and told police that Thomas Montgomery and he had a conversation at one point. Thomas told this coworker that if he ever shot someone or murdered someone, he would do so with an M1A1 sniper rifle. Now, on top of that, the evidence started mounting against Thomas Montgomery. Investigators could not find him, though, and they were worried for Jesse's safety because once they heard the story of how there was a love triangle going on, they knew that Jesse was probably in danger. They were able to track Jesse down by her MySpace. So they call in, and the Oak Hill, West Virginia police go to Jesse's home at 6 a.m. 2 officers arrived and knocked on the door. Mary Schuyler, which was Jesse's mother, answered the door. They asked if Jesse was home, and she said no. They started telling her the story of Jesse and Brian and Jesse and Tom, and then Tom's decision to ultimately end Brian's life. They told her that her daughter was in danger, that she could be hurt, or even worse, she could be dead. Mary started to panic. The law enforcement officer said they could see that she was clearly incredibly nervous and so upset by this information. She started sobbing uncontrollably, and they were like, just let us, give us Jesse's phone number, we'll call her and we'll find her, we promise this will be okay. That's when Mary Schuyler looked at the deputies, the law enforcement officers, and told them, I am Jesse. I am the one who did this. I've been using my daughter's pictures online. Talk about a plot twist. So Jesse's mother, 18-year-old Jessie, who did exist, her mother was the one catfishing these two men. Mary had been using Jesse's photos to lure Brian and Thomas in to talk to her. The real Jesse had never said a word to either of the men. Mary had been sending out photos of her daughter and underwear that belonged to her daughter. She had been talking to these men in a incredibly sexual way. A mother used her young, innocent, beautiful daughter as bait to lure men in to talk to her. Look at the result of that. Just like Thomas, Mary also lived in a fantasy land. How could a mother do this to her child? I am not a mother, but I can't imagine doing this to anybody, much less someone who I say that I love and I'm supposed to protect. Not only did Mary use her daughter, but she set her up in a scenario where she could have been kidnapped or killed. Even after Tom threatened her and threatened Brian, Mary kept it up. She put Jesse in harm's way. And for what? Some compliments about Jesse and not even about her? Police recovered information that Mary talked to a lot of men. It wasn't just Brian and Thomas. Every single day, she would essentially pimp out her daughter, her photos, her life, and lure these men in to talk to them for gratification. She is so vile, and it makes me absolutely sick. Mary's asked to fill out a police report, and she did. She said that Thomas called her not even 10 minutes after 10:15, telling her that, quote, your boyfriend was so easy to take down, and that no 18-year-old was gonna get the best of him. They finally were able to track down Thomas and get him to interview, but he would not cooperate. He told them he didn't kill Brian, and he sounded really convincing. Psychologists think it's because in his brain, he, Thomas Montgomery, didn't kill Brian. Tommy Montgomery, the person inside of him, killed Brian. Now, it boils down to the fact that Thomas did it. He pulled the trigger and Brian is dead, and he is worse than Mary is for that. But since Tom didn't confess and there weren't any witnesses, they couldn't keep him. And so the investigation was continued. They confiscated Thomas's computer and they found thousands and thousands of saved messages. Those aren't even the ones that weren't saved. They took his phone record and his phone pinged 10 minutes after Brian was murdered at Dinah Braid. Come to find out, that phone call that Jesse or Mary told the police about, that's the one that Thomas made. He was still at the murder site, the crime scene, when he called Jesse or Mary. Tom's coworkers also told investigators that Tom had been asking about Brian's schedule that day. So clearly he was interested to know what shift Brian was working and what time he would be there. There were two physical pieces of evidence left at the scene that were the most damning. One was a peach pit that was found not even a foot away from the truck, and the DNA was tested on that peach pit and it matched that of Thomas Montgomery. Now, Thomas's defense would go on and say that Thomas worked there. You know, he would eat a peach every morning and throw the peach out. But prosecution made a valid point by saying it was a foot away from Brian's truck. The parking lot is filled with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of spots. So why is he gonna pick that one specific place to drop a peach pit? Also, a gun clip was found at the scene of the crime, and that gun clip was Thomas Montgomery's. We know this because in a pretty incriminating phone call made while he was in prison, he confessed to his wife that the gun clip found at the scene of the crime was his. The rifle shells found at the scene of the crime also matched the rifle that Tom had told his coworker that he would use to kill someone if he ever killed anyone. which what a weird conversation to have anyway, but you know, that's just me. They took Thomas's gun cabinet, and of course, the gun wasn't there, and the gun has yet to be recovered. However, when they did a search of Thomas's home, they found an old photo of Cindy sitting on the bed, and in the background is a gun cabinet. And that gun cabinet is filled with different guns, obviously. FBI did a deep enhancement of this photo, and by doing that, they were able to, you know, determine that that specific gun was in that gun case at that time. The investigators had a solid case, and they were able to arrest Thomas Montgomery. At this point, he had no idea that Jesse wasn't Jesse, that Mary was Jesse, and I would pay anything to have been a fly on the wall in that room when he found out. They took him into custody, and they placed a photo of Mary on the table, and they told him, "This is Jesse. This is who you've been talking to." Law enforcement officials say that he turned the color of the walls, which were pasty white, and he didn't say a word. Thomas said he was shocked to find out that Jesse was really 46-year-old Mary, the mother of Jesse. He said that Mary was a great actress, and she played the part to a T. He said that he really believed she was 18 whenever she believed that he was able to sit in a Humvee playing poker and online games talking to her while in the middle of these, you know, recon missions or in the middle of a war. He said that he didn't think she had much sense. He tells interviewers that he is emotionally immature and that when she gave him the slightest bit of attention, he was hooked. When he was arrested, he was a fairly large man. He was, 6 foot tall, big barrel chest, and after being in jail for only 2 months, he lost over 100 pounds. He said he literally did not eat. He did not eat anything. He said he was 6 feet tall and 130 pounds when he went to his plea deal, which we're going to talk about the plea deal here in a minute. At one point while in prison, he attempted to take his own life. He said he found sleeping pills in another inmate's cell, and he took 25 Seroquel to try to kill himself. He said he was so distraught because his kids were the only thing he had left, and what good was it if even they didn't want anything to do with him? What was his point of even living? His attorney immediately looked into an insanity plea, saying that, Tom was insane, and that's the reason he did this. Most of the time, if that is found out, then instead of going to just prison, you will go to some form of psychiatric hospital or, receive medical help for your psychiatric needs. You won't be fit to stand trial. The psychiatrist told him that there was nothing there. Although his relationship online was delusional, and he was delusional in that sense, when it came to the murder, it was methodical. It was planned out and thought out and executed. The entire time, Thomas said he didn't do it. He had an alibi. He wanted a trial. He claims that at the time of Brian's murder, he was at home with his wife. He said that his wife and daughters would back that up. However, our queen, Cindy, Thomas's wife, did the exact opposite. She could not tell police fast enough that not only was he not with them, but he wasn't at the house at all during that time. She also told them that she didn't want anything to do with any of this. We love our unproblematic queen. He was able to talk to his daughters in a prison call, and that's when he made the incriminating call that I was talking about earlier. He said to Cindy, that he had the gun clip was, the gun clip that was at the crime scene was his. He then talked to his daughters, and he told them, if you just change the time a little bit, Daddy will get to come home. Like, just back that up or shave some time off and I'll get out because I was with you. And it was clearly just him telling them what to do and telling them to lie. And Cindy was not having any of that. And of course, the call was recorded, so police immediately found out, and that was used against him. He then decides, after talking to his attorney and his daughters, that he doesn't want to put them through the embarrassment and the emotional trauma of a trial, watching their dad in a murder trial. He figured they may be called up to the witness stand and it's just not worth it, so he decides to take the plea deal. Thomas and his attorney met 3 times on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and by that Friday, he knew he wanted to take the plea deal. So on Monday, Thomas Montgomery took a plea deal for several reasons. 1, his daughters, and 2, his attorney told them that an acquittal was nearly impossible because of the amount of evidence that they had against him. The judge of this sentencing is on up there with our queen, Cindy, for the best person in this story. The judge told Thomas, and I'm gonna read it for accuracy, that this was an absolutely senseless killing over a non-existent relationship that turned into a love triangle between 3 people that didn't even know each other. Truer words have never been spoken. After signing a plea deal for first-degree manslaughter, Thomas admitted to shooting Brian 3 times with a .30 caliber rifle. Thomas Montgomery was sentenced to 20 years in prison for a first-degree manslaughter charge. And this is single-handedly the worst part of this case. If he's good in prison, he may serve 17. Rex Baber says it best. He says, 20 years and probably serving 17 is an absolute insult to anybody who knew or loved Brian. Yes, 17 to 20 years is a long time, especially for someone who's never been to prison, never had a criminal record, but a young life is invaluable and priceless. Brian's parents were obviously very upset by this. They said that if anyone had called, anybody even at Dinah Braid, then things would have been different. This wouldn't have happened. They didn't even know about Jesse until Brian passed away. Brian's poor father blames himself. He says, I was the one who gave him the newspaper ad to apply at Dinah Braid. I'm an IT person, so I blame myself for, having computers in the home. He said it's just so unfortunate that Jessie ticked all of Brian's boxes, that she fit everything that he wanted in a girlfriend and a future wife. He said since he liked blondes and athletic girls, that had it been a different image of a different person, things could have been so different. Jessie had sent Brian letters in the mail, packages, photos. He had no reason not to believe she was who she said she was. They were stunned, like all of us, that Mary could do this to her own daughter. Brian's mother says a true mother would never do that. They would never use their daughter and solicit her to reach out to strange men on the internet. They said that her careless actions led them to one of their greatest sorrows. They felt as though there needed to be more laws in place, and that's something that they work on. They want more laws in place to try and prevent this, to have more internet accountability. They said that people don't need to be able to freely walk away from something like this with not even a slap on the wrist, which Mary Schuyler did. She was never held legally responsible for her actions. She never had a trial, never went to jail. Detectives said that although she set this entire thing into motion, investigators cannot do anything because Tom pulled the trigger. New York law requires, without a reasonable doubt, for Mary to have been proved to have assisted Tom in this. And by assisted, I mean physically assisted in this, or at the very least told him to do it, which she did neither of those things. Yes, she worked him up, and yes, she caused this entire thing, but she never told Tom to kill Brian. Mary Schuyler was also married at the time that this happened to Jesse's father, Tim. Tim said that before any of this happened, he and his wife were good. They had a good marriage, and he planned on spending the rest of his life with her and dying of old age with her. However, he said he noticed something different about her. He would come and go from work, and she would be sitting on the couch, and he would say, hey, bye, I love you, and she would just be looking, at her computer, and she would say, yeah, bye, I love you, and continue, she wouldn't even look up from the laptop. He started wondering what was going on, and he asked her, and she would just get angry and defensive, much like Thomas Montgomery when Cindy would ask him what was going on. If he walked over to her to, kiss her or, sit beside her, she would shut her laptop really quickly. And he would be like, "Why are you doing that?" And she would say, "Well, I have to lean forward to kiss you, don't I?" Mary and Tim were divorced shortly after all of this came out. But he said that in the time that he was with her after this happened, she showed absolutely no remorse. He said that he feels without any reasonable doubt that she should feel equally as responsible, or at least some responsibility, for Brian's death, but she doesn't at all. She continued to lie to her family even after Brian had passed away. Mary told Tim, her husband, that she needed to tell him something, that she had done something that was not so good. She said that she went into this online chat room and one of the men in the chat had a mental problem. She said that, she was also talking to another guy who worked at the same company that the first guy who had the mental problem with worked at. The first guy got jealous of the second guy, and the first guy killed the second guy. And Tim clearly had a ton of questions. She told him she was one of several people in a chat room, that it wasn't like a one-on-one thing. And she says they all talked about the weather, sports, just made small talk. He never knew anything more happened until Mary had to go testify. And once that happened, he realized the entire truth. Simultaneously, as Mary was in New York, Jesse's friends were talking to Jesse, and they had heard things. And so, they had told her she may want to kind of, look into it. Upon Googling her mother's name, she found out all of the awful things her mother had done while using her photos. Can you even imagine that? Jesse asked Tim if he knew, and Tim told her, "No, I had no idea." They were both absolutely appalled. I mean, how could you do this to your own child? Jesse asked Tim why he thought Mary did this to her. Tim said that he had formed an opinion of his wife over the years. He told her that he felt as though if Mary felt like she could get away with something, she would do it. If she could talk or cry her way out of something, she would do it. It was even a running joke at her parents' house that one time Mary got in trouble for something, and Mary's mother said that Mary was apologizing and crying, and she had turned around, and when she turned back around, Mary was like rubbing her eyes, trying to make herself cry so she could get out of being in trouble. Mary had been a good liar her entire life. Jesse, the real Jesse, Jessica Schuyler, has never felt up to interviews, which is fair. She has already been violated enough. Once Tim and Mary divorced, Jesse and Tim cut out communication with Mary completely. They have refused to have anything to do with her. Jesse feels as though her mother betrayed her in the most horrific way. Tim said that Jesse doesn't feel as though her mother is sorry for what she's done. Mothers are supposed to protect and love their children unconditionally and do anything for them, and Mary did the exact opposite. Tim and Jesse feel as though Mary deserves jail time for what she's done. They feel as though she was part of the reason that Brian ultimately and unfortunately passed away. They said that jail time is the only thing that would help Mary realize that what she had done was wrong. Tim Jr., which is Jesse's brother, Mary and Tim's son, still talks to Mary, or at least he did, as of 2009. That's as far as we can tell about Mary. We don't know what she's up to or where she's at today. As of 2009, Tim said that Mary didn't talk to him about what happened, but she had been spending a lot of time on her laptop again. He was really concerned that she was doing all of this all over again. 2009, the documentary Tall Hot Blonde hired a PI, and it took 6 months for them to find Mary, but they finally did, and she was living with her parents. Once they found her, Mary approached the door once the reporter knocked, but she wouldn't allow cameras inside. She said that she doesn't want Tom Montgomery to know what she looks like once he gets out. So what was her side of the story? What was her defense? Why did she do all of this? She said that all she ever wanted to be was a good mother. She said she never meant for any of this to happen. She was just bored and lonely. Her children had grown up. Her husband was away for work a lot, and she just was looking to have fun online. She said the only reason she kept talking to Tom was to try to prevent him from talking to other real teenagers. Rex Baber disagrees. He said that she was just playing the victim. Remember, she had that weird diary post about being Mrs. Jessica Montgomery. So was she also living in this fantastical lifestyle? Like, what world was she in? She was taking care of her own psychological needs to the detriment of another human life. Tim, her ex-husband, said she got away with not participating directly, but was still associated with ending a 22-year-old's life. And for what? All for thrills and all due to boredom. As of 2009, Tim wanted to contact Brian's family, but said he didn't know what he would say. Like, what do you say to somebody who's been in that situation and you're associated with this awful person? How could he make anyone feel better over the loss of their child over something so stupid? When the police confiscated Mary's computer, there were some incredibly dark things in there. Mary had hundreds of photos of Jesse on her computer, which is fairly normal for a mom, but most of the photos looked like they were taken without Jesse's consent, or even her knowledge. It seemed as though she was stalking her own daughter. She would just follow her around with a camera, or at least it appeared to from the photos that she had taken. Mary had been sending these photos to a lot of men, both via email and actual, printed out pictures in the mail. She took a photo, a compromising picture of Jesse in a miniskirt, taken somehow and without Jesse's knowledge from below her, so it angled up Jesse's skirt. She emailed this photo out to a lot of men with a caption, "Do you like what you see?" How you can take those photos, one, I'll never understand. How you can send them out to strange men, I have no words. Although Mary was not charged legally for this case, everyone involved thinks that she needs to be in prison with Thomas as well. Even Thomas himself said she should be sitting right here where I'm sitting. Tom went on just a few days after his plea deal. He fires his attorney and says that his attorney talked him into making this plea deal, that he really didn't do it. His appeal was denied, and he will be serving out the remainder of his sentence in prison. He will be getting out of prison unless something changes, anywhere between 2022 and 2026. He will be anywhere between 63 and 67 when he gets out of prison. In my opinion, he should have been in jail a lot longer than he was, and Mary should be in jail with him. A young man's life was taken from this earth, all for senseless, immature, childish behavior and a fantasy land. I think both of them definitely need some psychiatric help, and I hope that they have both been getting it. As of 2020, Mary's nowhere to be found, probably still living with her parents. Jesse and Tim, nowhere to be found, have no contact with Mary, if it's still like it was in 2009, and Tom is in prison. The Barrett family have been continually trying to get laws into place for accountability on the internet. They're having to remember Brian by their memories instead of getting to see him grow up and become a teacher and find a girlfriend, get married, maybe have some kids of his own, have grandkids, retire, and live a full life that he deserved to live. There's no real way to end this case besides saying, please be careful who you talk to on the internet, because you really never know who you're actually talking to. Be honest, be truthful. Don't make fake profiles. If you are bored and want something to do, go outside, buy some plants. If you feel as though it's something that you struggle with, see a therapist. Just do not let history repeat itself. Do not let this happen again. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate so much all of the love and support on the last video. I hope you enjoyed the first Plot Twist Tuesday. This definitely had some plot twists. And yeah, I will have the Gannon Stalk video up on Saturday, which is just in 4 days from today. Also remember to subscribe if you would like to, like this video if you enjoyed it, comment, have a conversation with me, have a conversation with others. I love reading the comments and talking to you guys and picking your brains. Some people left some really interesting comments about Letitia and the last video and about the interview, so make sure that you're still commenting and let's talk about it. What do you feel about this case? Do you feel as though Thomas needed longer in prison? Do you feel as though Mary needed to be in prison? What are your thoughts? Don't forget about our giveaway. I will be giving away some really cool true crime themed gifts and prizes once we hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'm super pumped about that. I've got some really cool items that I have ready to give away and some that I'm going to order when we get a little bit closer. Stay safe, stay quarantined if you can at this moment, and I will see you on Saturday. Bye.